Hey guys, it's TheFrXion here, Tiger Tank 12, however you call me, I don't really care. Welcome back to World of Tanks, where we are today reviewing the Indien Panzer. This is a tank that is at tier 8, and it's actually quite unique. I think it's one of the tanks for the German tech tree that looks very, very special. And it's a tank that has quite interesting history. It was never built, probably only plans and blueprints, but this tank was actually meant to be for the Indian Army. Now, you've heard correctly, yes, for the Indian Army, the country of India in South Asia. And actually, this tank is named after the country, because in Germany, or in German, Indian means India. So basically, that's the origin of this tank. It was never produced. It was meant to be produced in India, but they deemed it to be too complicated to produce the vehicle there. So they never went through with it. It seems to be very similar to the Panzer 58 Pz, and you would think that both of them are in the German tech tree. They might be somewhat related, but that is actually not the case. The Panzer 58 Pz is a Swiss tank and has nothing to do with the Indien Panzer. And this tank is only in the German tech tree because there is no Swiss tech tree or pan-European tech tree where you can put in other vehicles that are not part of the Germans or the French or whatever. So there is one thing that is very awkward and weird whenever I talk about the Indien Panzer, and it is the fact that you cannot actually run the stock gun with the stock tracks. And I'm going to show you guys that real quick, because I'm running the BPS. This is the stock variant of the vehicle. This is completely stock except for the gun. You can see the 90mm gun is not the stock gun. This is the gun that you have to research. There's another one that you have to research as well, which costs you 16,500 experience, and the other one is about 18,300 experience, or exactly 18,300 experience. So why do I have a tank that is completely stock except for the gun, and I can run it on the BPS tracks? It turns out that I cannot run the stock gun with the stock tracks because it's considered to be too heavy for the vehicle suspension, and that doesn't make any sense because it's the stock tracks and the stock gun. It has to work together. But if I mount the upgraded Indien Panzer tracks, I can actually mount the stock gun. Look at that, really awkward. I can also mount the L71 gun, but I don't have it in my garage or my inventory right now, so I'm not going to buy it. But you can see this is the tank when it's completely stock with the stock gun, but with the upgraded tracks. But if I want to run the top gun and I want to run it with the stock tracks, I can do it. That's really weird. I don't understand it, and I haven't been able to grind this tank in the recent time because I already own it from years back. So I just had it completely filled out with everything. So I cannot give you the stock experience, unfortunately, because I'm unable to really play the 88mm gun right there, or this one in a stock configuration, because I always need to have the top tracks. But I can tell you that already. So what you want to do with this tank is you definitely want to get the 88mm gun, the KWK 43L71, as quickly as you can, and that means you'll need to have the upgraded tracks, because else it will not work. So I would go 88mm gun, go with the tracks first, then 88mm gun, and then you can definitely go either with the engine, which will give you 170 horsepower additionally on top of it, or you can go with the 90mm gun. Now, the radio, I'm expecting you to already have, the TheFrXion, at least the tier 6 radio. That will do at first, but if you really want to have more signal range of 720 meters, you can also go for the radio before you go for the 90mm gun. Now, the difference between the 88mm gun and the 90mm gun, these are actually quite important because there are some very, very big differences with the two guns. First and foremost, the 88mm gun has less pen and less average damage. You can see it has less premium ammunition pen, and it has a lot less high explosive pen that the 90mm gun does provide. You have worse rate of fire, you have worse dispersion, and a worse aim time. So definitely go for the 90mm gun as soon as you can, because this is the gun that makes this tank very, very nice. A tank that I do enjoy quite a lot whenever I play it. So let's take a look at the firepower and let's take a dive into what makes the Indien Panzer and why it is a tank that is kind of overlooked a lot of the times, because in my opinion, this is a tank that does do very, very well in the game and is a lot of fun. And yeah, that's why I'm making a review on this tank line. You have 250 alpha damage or average damage with the 90mm gun, which is okay, I guess. It's not the best, but the 218mm of penetration, that's really, really neat. That's really nice. And additional on top of that, we're going to take a look at the different shells that you are carrying with this gun. And you can actually see that you have very great shell velocity. 1,000 meters per second shell velocity for an AP shell is really nice. That's great. That's almost on the level of an APCR shell. And the APCR shells, the premium shells, they have really great shell velocity of 1,250 meters per second, and they have 259 millimeters of penetration. If you need that, you have it available right there. They are quite expensive though, since unfortunately you have to pay 4,400 credits per shot, but the AP shells and the high explosive shells are quite cheap. Talking about the high explosive shells, let's take a look at these bad boys. Shell velocity, 1,000 meters per second. You have 90 millimeters of penetration. That is insane. That is really great. Whenever you face a Burrasque, you face a light tank, you face a tank destroyer, load high explosive shells, they will decimate the opponents and they'll do so much damage, and you will reliably be able to pen them when you have the 90 millimeters of penetration. That's really great, and they're really cheap to boot. So one of the things I would really do is load up a lot of high explosive shells, more than APCR, because it's going to be great when you have those lightly armored tanks or the side or the rear of vehicles that do not have a lot of armor, and you can just, puncture them with 300, 400 damage with a single shot. That's awesome. I tell you, it's such a novel thing. Then, traverse speed on this tank, unfortunately, it's not the best, but it's also not too bad. 39.94 degrees per second with Brothers in Arms, and one of the modifications certainly is okay. One of the big downsides to the tank is you only have one turret, which is also an upside, because you don't have to go through another turret and invest another 20,000 experience. But it's more of a downside because you will not get a stronger turret with more armor and better protection, unfortunately. You have 10 degrees of gun depression, 20 degrees of gun elevation. Both of the stats are great. Aim time is amazing. Dispersion is great. DPM, as you can see right here, because I'm running gun rammer, it's really nice. This is a tank that has an amazing gun, a tank that has an amazing ability to be accurate at range, and to really dish out the damage at a very high rate of fire, or at a very quick rate. Survivability wise, we'll have a little bit of an issue right here. This tank is rather large. If you take a look at it, it's a very big tank. It's long, it's wide, and it's tall. Unfortunately, you only have 1,300 hit points, which is on the lower spectrum. 90 millimeters of hull armor at the front, 90 on the side, 45 at the rear, and same goes for the turret. Now, one of the biggest issues is that this turret, obviously, because it's rounded, it does bounce some shots quite funnily, because it's a bit awkward when you're shooting it from the front and you're wiggling around. But since the turret is this lightly armored, the gun mantlet is actually not much thicker, and it's quite easy to actually go through this tank from the front. The hull armor very easily penetrated. You have a very big lower plate, and even the upper plate, it is angled nicely, but usually, because it only is 90 millimeters thick, you can go through with a lot of tanks very, very easily. So unfortunately, this tank is not armored at a great deal, but if you play it a bit more cautiously, you should be doing fine. But it does require a bit more of, it's preparing you to the Leopard line. That means where you have even less armor, you have to be very, very wary of your HP. That's the one thing you have to be keeping an eye on. And it's going to be quite difficult at first to learn how to play this tank effectively without dying very early on, without having done any damage, because you died in a position that you didn't want to be in. Now, let's take a look at the top speed and the mobility on the vehicle. Now, the mobility on this tank is acceptable. It's actually decent in my books. You can see the tank doesn't weigh a massive amount, almost 43 tons if fully upgraded, but its in counterparts at tier 8, I don't think it's going to be the heaviest one. The Panther 88 is heavier, the Indien Panzer should be heavier as well, a massive 10 tons more. The TL1 LPC is going to be, it's lighter, which is quite interesting since the tank looks heavier to me. But either way, yeah, the weight, it's decent. I wouldn't go around ramming tanks, though. It's not your specialty. Now, the one thing that you have to look into is the specific power to weight ratio. You have 759 horsepower on your engine. That is with the modifications and turbocharger that I have right here. You have about 700, or I think it's 680 or something along that lines. So I would improve the engine power, because the specific power to weight ratio, it's okay. 19.07 horsepower per ton means that you'll be accelerating at a decent pace. But if you want to accelerate faster, if you want to be able to up your speed faster, you really need to improve it. And I would say go for the turbocharger. Use that slot if you already have access to it, and maybe even use the where is it? Actually, there is no directives for that, but you could even use, no, I would just keep it like this. But I would definitely try to improve it a little bit with the turbocharger. The top speed is 60 kilometers because of the turbocharger as well. It would be 55. You reaching the 60 kilometers per hour mark, difficult. Doesn't happen often, but it does happen when you go downhill, and that's where you can really gain a lot of speed and be able to reach positions with one of the with the first tanks that have to go there. Traverse speed, on the other hand, I would say is decent enough, 44.59 with a couple of upgrades. I wouldn't worry too much about that. Moving on to concealment, this is one of the major downsides, as well as spotting. Now you can see concealments on this tank. It's a big vehicle, it's difficult to conceal, and that's why I would really try to push it quite a bit further. You can see my crew is not completely skilled out with the concealment skill, but I would definitely advise everyone to have concealment on the crew, and I would also try to improve it with field modifications. Moving on to spotting, this vehicle lacks the view range. As I mentioned prior, because it only has one turret, it will not get an upgraded turret with better vision. You only have 380 meters base view range, and that's the same as the VK3002D, which is the predecessor to this tank, and unfortunately it doesn't get better. This does get better a lot when you go to the tier 9 tank, the Leopard Prototype A, and that's certainly one of the reasons why I would highly advise you to go through the field modifications and get the second slot with scouting. If you have the specialization on scouting, I would put on a coated optics on there, and then the vehicle becomes a lot more bearable for spotting things and being more flexible. I'd say we move on into the field modifications real fast, and I'd say it's like always the same configuration. I want to have better hull traverse speed, gun traverse speed. I don't care about the ammo wreck penalty or the dispersion of a damaged gun, because I usually repair all of those things. Now the improved sight for better accuracy, now it's at 0.29. That's really, really great. And then I went with anti-reflective headlight coating, which allows me to get more concealment, which is quite interesting and important. Now, if you want to free mark this tank, if you're using food or rations or chocolate in this case, you can improve this even further, and you can have better spotting and concealment. So that's what I would go for if I would be free marking this vehicle. I think, generally speaking, this is a tank that does extremely well at long-range engagements and medium-range engagements, and it can fight on hill tops and little ridge lines. So this is a tank that actually has so much to offer, but it kind of doesn't get featured often because it might look weird, or it might just not be the fan favorite. But I think it's one of the tanks that is overlooked by a majority of the player base. So let's take a look at the equipment. Now, with the equipment that we have right here, I went with gun rammer for max DPM. I went with coated optics for max view range, also to utilize the scouting specialization down there, and I went with the turbocharger for improved mobility. And generally speaking, I think turbocharger here is definitely the best option. You could go with improved rotation mechanism and additional grousers, but I just think that generally speaking, this tank with more horsepower in there, it's a really nice feature, and it makes the tank a lot more flexible. So that's what I would pick, but you can also go some different routes, maybe use improved ventilations if you do not want to use the turbocharger, or you do not wish to use coated optics for whatever reason that might be. And yeah, I think generally speaking that should work out quite fine. You do not need vertical stabilizer on this tank because the stabilization, or at least the accuracy when turning your turret, is extremely high, and you don't really have to worry about that too much. Load a lot of high explosive and just try it out. Keep in mind that you have 90 millimeters of pen with high explosive shells, and that will do a lot more damage. So you'll be able to do a lot more damage in this tank than other vehicles can, because you have this very nice ace up your sleeve. So without further ado, I'd say we jump into the gameplay, and I'm going to show you guys what you can do with this tank and how nasty it can be, and hopefully I can paint a picture of how awesome of a tank this really is. So let's jump on over and figure it out. So we have one game where we're playing against some tier 8 opponents, and maybe I'm going to show the second game as well, which is also against tier 8 opponents, but this is where you'll find yourself in most of the time if the conditions are perfect, but you'll also be facing some tier 9 and 10 tanks, certainly in the future when you're playing the Indien Panzer. Now, playing on Overlord, there's a very nice place where you can go play your medium tanks with a lot of bushes, and that's exactly where we're going. It's the E6, E7 area, and E8. That's where you have these hedges, which are very well known in Normandy, which are almost impassable even by tanks. During World War II was a very big area that the Allies had to go past after they've gone through the beaches, but that's not that important right now. This is a great place to spot tanks and to deal some damage, especially when you have 10 degrees of gun depression, as we have on the Indien Panzer. Now, with the 10 degrees of gun depression and with a little bit of map knowledge and knowing where the enemies are, you can put some very nice pressure on these guys. So right there we have a Carnarvon Action X, and we have a Brigado 46 over here. But since we have very good gun depression, we have great gun characteristics, great aim time, great accuracy, we can just put shot after shot into targets that pop up right here. And that Carnarvon is not having a good day. As you can see, he's almost dead already in the very early stages of the game. Only a minute and 30 seconds played so far, and he is already down to 10 or 15% of HP. We're just waiting because we know there's a Burrasque somewhere hiding in the bushes. The Brigado has been spotted as well, and we have some other medium tanks and light tanks fighting at F0. And if you control the left side and you control the middle on this map, you basically control the rest of the game most of the time. The beach is a place that takes way too long. You don't have enough cover. People do push, but they are not really able to do a lot of damage because, well, they have to trade in a lot of their HP to be able to fight there, and thus the beach is not really the ideal position unless you just push through really aggressively and you manage to go to the cap. So we put another shot into the Brigado, and as you can see, with this accuracy, with the gun handling, you really don't have any kind of problem when you're playing the Indien Panzer. And we bounce a shot from the T-92 and we put one into him, and you can see artillery has become notified of us that we are in a position that might be a bit annoying for the enemy team. So far we're just waiting for the queue to actually move up, and I'm kind of worried about the Burrasque because I do not want to get completely annihilated by waiting Burrasque in a bush, because having to tank 390 or 60 damage shots is not going to be really nice, because you'll end up losing about half of your HP, sometimes even more. So I'm waiting for the queue to actually move up here and put some pressure on the vehicles that are at F0. And that's one of the main things that you have to have when you're playing this tank. That is patience. So we see that the Burask has just been lit up. We know that the T92 is somewhere close by. So I move up, and you can see that I've already loaded a high explosive shell. This is one of the features that you'll be enjoying quite a lot when you're playing this tank, and that is high explosive. You'll see how great this is going to work out, and it's really awesome. Having 90mm of penetration on the high explosive shell is such a novel feature that not a lot of tanks have. But this line, the Leopard line, they all have great pen with high explosive shells. The Leopard Prototype A and the Leopard 1, they both have 105mm of pen with the high explosive shell, but I don't think that they have the shell velocity that we have on the Indien Panzer, which is quite formidable with 1,000 meters per second shell velocity. So you can see that this T92, he doesn't really understand the basics of spotting and concealment. He was way too aggressive. He was lit up the entire time, and thus it was easy for our LT 432 to actually knock him out of the game. Another high explosive shell right into the side of the Burask, and it's not a lot of fun when you're on the receiving end of high explosive shells, and it's just such a joy to be able to do this amount of damage to tanks that have no armor. And another one, 345 damage and a critical hit as well. Like, this is the way that you actually do a lot of damage whenever you're playing the Indien Panzer, because this high explosive is such a brutal weapon. It does so much damage, and it reliably does the amount of damage that you need to get the marks of excellence. So if you're trying to 3-mark this tank, I would highly suggest to really use high explosive shells, because being able to do like 389 damage or 329 is a great increase over the 250 that you usually do, and that's something that is very novel to this tank. Now, speaking about the mobility, as I mentioned prior, I said the mobility is not the best. Well, I mean, it's decent, but it's not like top tier level. That's because the acceleration is not on that level. But you still have, when you're going downhill very quickly, the top speed in the bag, which is 60 kilometers with the turbocharger. And I would really suggest using the turbocharger as well. Now, since I know I have enough HP, I'm going to tank one shot from the T-34-3. I'm going to move into cover. And I'm just going to be able to put more pressure on this guy because I have the gun depression, I have really good aim time, and unfortunately I missed that shot. But since the DPM is this high, we were almost ready to fire another one into him, but we still have an IS-6. Now the question is only, are we going to be the ones that are able to get in there in time to put some more pressure on the IS-6B and maybe even take him out? And if that is the case, we can definitely go above 3,000 damage dealt. So, as I mentioned already, I think this tank has great gun characteristics. It's amazing at medium ranges, at long ranges. Accuracy is really great. The pen is really great. You don't really need to be spamming gold ammo. Most of the time, I only use it when I have like a really bad opponent in front of me at tier 10 or tier 9. But not even then I'm using it very freely, because I do not want to be wasting credits, because I'm usually always short on credits. And if you want to save credits, this tank certainly is one of those vehicles that can save you a lot of credits if you only use high explosive and AP shells, which are both fairly competitive at tier 8 and even tier 9. So first game, 3,492 damage. Very straightforward, very quick. We're going to jump into the second game, where you can see what you have to do when things turn out to be a bit different and there's more of a stalemate. And you'll have to maneuver your tank into a position where you have to use camo to your advantage. That's where the tank can also work, but it has its limitations. So we're going to jump into that gameplay, and then we're going to finish this review up. It's on Karelia. It's a map that a lot of players hate, a lot of players love. Yeah, basically there's no one that is kind of neutral on this map. think majority of them either hate it or love it. And I count myself to the player base that loves this map because I just really like all the places. I like to fight in the north, I like to fight in the south, I like to fight in the middle, I like to be at the base, I like to be at the other base, and overall I think I know the map very well to be effective enough to do my part in winning the game. So the north usually is not the place I go to. I usually always go to the south because the south just has so many different things that you can do. You can go up the hill, you can push the south all the way to the enemy team, and right there we get a very nice shot into the wheeled cancer tank. Because we have that shell velocity, 1,000 meters per second, you can just basically hit anything. And next thing up is the Indien Panzer 105, who has very early on gotten into a position that is very stealthy, but that wasn't really allowing him to stay alive for very long. He's almost dead now, and we have lost about 400 HP in that engagement. Now, unfortunately for us, this tank doesn't sport the best armor. Bouncing shots with this tank is fairly rare. It's a rare occasion. It only really happens when they don't aim well enough and they kind of miss your tank by a little bit. Unfortunately, most of the time they will hit your tank and they will be able to pen it. That means you'll have to be very, very careful whenever you move yourself into a dangerous position. You need to know what risk you can take and what risk you shouldn't be taking because your HP will dwindle down very, very quickly and you'll just have a very bad time. But as I mentioned prior, I think the pros by far outweigh the cons. We hit the Lynx 6x6 while he's driving away with a high explosive shell, and we deal 335 damage. A very nice roll, or at least for a high explosive shell, it's a decent roll. But with an AP shell, that would have been a very high roll. So right now, because we have the view range of up to 400 and I think 35 meters, we are just kind of surveilling the north. We're looking into the middle of the map if they are pushing anywhere, and we want to see if they are kind of brave enough to put some eyes into the middle. There is a big lack of scouts on both sides. They lost the ELC even 90 very early on in the game, and we have an AFK T92 and we have a Lynx 6x6 who is fighting with our heavy tanks in the south, which is really weird. But I guess maybe if he wants to play like that, he can try it out. The team does call him out on his gameplay eventually because they get really frustrated that they can't see anything. But yeah, sometimes you just have players like that play strangely. But yeah, we're trying to spot something in the middle, doesn't really work out, and now it's a game of patience because pushing the south is not going to work out. They have tank destroyers hiding at the back, they have artillery right there, and everything is just shooting anything that is moving past K5. We have an M3Y, IS-3A, a Skoda T56, and I think most of them are going to be knocked out very rapidly because they just cannot push around that corner, be effective when there are so many tank destroyers sitting at the back and our artillery also putting on some pressure onto these guys. So that means you'll have to have some patience because you'll have to wait for the enemy to make some mistakes until you can actually make some progress. Now for me personally, the tank has enough mobility so that we can turn all the way up to A2, push the A line, but I don't want to go up there right now. I do not want to go into a face fight or face-on fight with a T-44-100. I much rather have a little bit of a second line of defense or offense and shoot anything that the Burask or the TS5 or the Scorpion do spot. Fortunately for us, our team, they are quite adamant about pushing the south. So our heavy tanks are just kind of slugging it out with these tanks over there and with the TDs that are sitting at the back. And at the same time, I'm sniping with a defender, and we lost our Lynx 6x6 because he suicided into the crowd that was right on the corner there. Unfortunately, that means We have no scouts that are actively participating in the game because we have a T-92 that is hiding at the back. So this is one of the main problems, at least in my opinion, that I have with the Indien Panzer. It is a tank that I would have thought that has great base view range, but turns out that that is not the case. This tank only has 380 meters view range, and that is on par with the tier 7 predecessor that we had prior, but not on par with a tier 8 medium tank, especially one that kind of is well known, or at least the line is very well known for very great gun handling and for very, very good view range. So it's a bit of a shame, but with the right equipment as we have on, we're still going to be able to outspot our opponents if it comes to that. So right now I know that the Škoda T56 is on low HP and he's trying to hold this corner, and I do not want us to get flanked by maybe an M4Y or a Škoda T56 and a Brigade 46. So that's why I'm trying to get myself into a sniping position where I can assist the Škoda T56 without getting spotted myself. So I have to cut that out. Yeah, I'll have to cut that out because the file, I hit the Windows button by accident. So yeah, I'll have to cut that out. Either way, you can see we just lost our M4043 because Iron X Monkey decided to suicide in his artillery piece because he was bored of playing artillery, probably. Cannot blame him, but that makes the game very much go against our fortune, because now we have lost majority of the HP. We have about one entire tier 8 tank less of HP than they have, and now they are in the ascendancy because they have some very nice benefits instead of us, and our team is basically strewn around the map in the north, in the middle, and in the south. You can see that they are slowly, sorry about that, they're slowly but surely moving forward, and they're trying to poke and see where they can push us. So in this little bush that I have right here, I'm able to spot the M4Y and the Škoda T56. Unfortunately for me, if I want to fire, I have to move all the way back to have the double bush. And if I want to spot them again, I'll have to move like forwards to be able to spot the vehicles. Unfortunately, it means that I'll always have to put myself at risk of getting shot at because they'll know that I'm in this bush. So right now I'm just trying to take out the Škoda T56 because he is definitely the more dangerous tank with his autoloader. And I know that in this moment in time, I'm not going to be of a lot of assistance to my team in this position unless they move up. And the M4Y, actually, he does move up because he's full HP. And he's going to present himself to our Škoda T56 and the Defender. And that's going to be quite painful for him. Thankfully, we dodged the artillery shell, but we still take about 200 HP of damage right there. But as you can see, our guys are now loading or unloading on the M4Y, and I'm also able to support them a little bit from the side. And you can see I've loaded APCR because I wanted to be able to penetrate the turret of the Škoda T56. Turns out it wasn't really necessary, so I do switch back to AP, I think, eventually. But right here, I'm just trying to keep these two guys alive. I really want to keep them alive, but yeah, sadly for us, we get spotted by a Scorpion G, and now we're at very, very desperate levels of HP where we have to be extremely careful with whatever we do. It might just be the last thing we do. Our Škoda T56 and a Scorpion in the back, they managed to knock out the Škoda T56 on the enemy team, and they also managed to knock out the M4Y. And I'm trying to get into a position where I can spot the Scorpion G, and at the same time, I just do spot the Turtle 1. Now with the Turtle 1, as it turns out, I thought I need APCR shells for the lower plate. Turns out you don't really need that. I still have APCR loaded because I really want to win this game. And in this, final final push, I want to be able to make every single shot count. Then we have the Turtle 1 now repositioning himself behind some dead tanks, and I know that it's going to be quite difficult to actually penetrate him now because he is in a hull down position that is fairly strong, with a tank that doesn't really have big weak spots on top of the vehicle. But we've been working with this bush quite nicely, and they haven't been able to spot us. That doesn't mean that this tank is extremely good with camouflage. It actually is quite the opposite. This tank is not very well camouflaged up, but it certainly has a decent enough camouflage to outwit the Scorpion G and the Turtle 1, but we have enough view range at least to spot them. So once again, loading the high explosive shell to put some very, very nice damage into the Scorpion G, and now it's all about taking out the Scorpion G and our team pushing the north. You can see we have the Scorpion G, the Burasque, and the TS5 on our team moving up on a Panzer 58 Mutz and on the T-44-100, and I'm just trying to actually keep an eye on the Scorpion G to keep them in this corner so that they cannot run away, so that we can actually push the guys from the north and have them finish everyone off, so that we can actually close the circle around the Turtle 1 and the Scorpion G. But don't worry, this game is not over yet. We're still going to be able to do some more damage, but now we just have to have some patience when we're waiting for the Scorpion G. So one of the main features you'll have to keep in mind when playing this tank is patience. Patience, patience, patience. You do not want to lose too much HP, and especially when you have lost HP, you do not want to lose any more HP, because you don't want to die early and do nothing for your team. It's much better to stay alive longer and be of assistance to your team than to die early on and basically do nothing because you want it to be really aggressive. Sometimes you have to push positions, sometimes you are left without any option, and that means you'll just have to figure something out. But you know, if you have played enough World of Tanks, you know when to push and not to push. That's just something you have to really learn when you're playing the Indian tank or all the other German medium tanks that have barely any armor. These tanks, they really are easily taken care of by other vehicles when they are spotted, and that's why you really have to be quite cautious whenever you're playing them. But I think in the end we managed to win this game by having enough patience to let them make some mistakes, you know, by allowing them to make the mistakes that were essential for us to, you know, slowly but surely chip away their HP. Our Skoda T56, the Burasque, the TS5 have done a really great job at the end of clearing everything up, and that's how we really like to have our games, to be close up until the end, where anything is possible and where the outcome is decided based on probably proper skill or the best tanks and the best tankers. In this case, we kind of had the advantage of premium tanks that are really powerful. TS5, Burasque, Skoda T56, all of these tanks are like some of the most powerful premium tanks on the market. And then in there is the Indien Panzer, which is not a premium tank, but fairly powerful as well in the right hands. So I think it's time for the final verdict. As you've heard out of my commentary, I really like this tank. I think it's a great asset for anyone. If you like medium tanks, you like mobility, you like sniping, this is the tank for you. If you like German accuracy, if you like to do a lot of damage with high explosive shells to medium tanks, to light tanks, to lightly armored tank destroyers, this is the tank for you. And generally speaking, I think this entire line consists of tanks that are really enjoyable to be played. The entire Leopard line is actually very, very fun, and every single tank has its own little thing. This is a really great tank with some amazing features, such as the high explosive shells or great AP shells with great shell velocity, and that's something that is not that you should not be taking for granted. So that's why I would really suggest trying out this tank, especially if you like medium tanks. You need to have a little bit of a learning curve with this one. It's not very easy to play and to master, but once you do, it's very satisfying, and you don't have to rely on APCR ammunition as much as I did in this game, but a lot of the times AP will do just fine, and the high explosive shells are a very nice cherry on top of the cake. So hopefully you guys did enjoy this review. As always, comment, like, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the next video. Until then, have a good one.